boys and girls, I want to teach you about a very, very famous artist that I think you probably have heard of. His name is Michelangelo, and he is one of America's great artists, and I'm going to tell you about him today. And your activity is you're going to get down on your back, and you're either going to put it on the desk or you're going to put it up in front of you, and you're going to see what it feels like to paint when you're flat of your back. And that is what Michelangelo did when he painted the Sistine Chapel. Michelangelo was born near Florence, Italy in 1475 during a time known as the Renaissance. Say that word, Renaissance. Many people think he was the greatest artist who ever lived. Michelangelo was a master of architecture, painting, and poetry, but his favorite art was making statues of people. Michelangelo sculpted many of his statues from big blocks of marble. He chipped away at the marble with a hammer and a chisel until he got it just the way he liked. The unfinished statue of St. Matthew shows how Michelangelo started one of his statues. So if you see here, he had the big piece of marble, but he didn't quite finish this one. It's very interesting, though, to see how he did it. Michelangelo made his statues look very lifelike. Sometimes he would polish them so they looked smooth and shiny, but sometimes he would leave chisel marks. The marks helped give the statues shape and a feeling of being alive when you were able to see them from a distance. These are two of his beautiful statues. When Michelangelo was born, his mother may have been too ill or too sick to take care of him, so his father took him to live with a family of stone cutters. And when he grew up, Michelangelo joked that this was the reason he loved to cut away at stone so much. Many times we hear these things, and it was so long ago that we just read about that we're not really sure exactly why. Michelangelo lived in just the right place at just the right time. In the 1400s and the 1500s, people in Florence were very interested in architecture, painting, poetry, and sculpture. And when Michelangelo was just 13, he learned a lot about art by just walking through the streets of Florence on his way to school and the workshop of Florence's most popular artist, Domenico Ghirlandaio. He loved the paintings of Giotto and Masaccio that he saw on the walls of churches in Florence, and he admired the sculptures of Donatello and Gioberti. These artists lived and worked in Florence before Michelangelo was born. I was able to go to Florence this past summer, and I saw lots of his work. Florence is in Italy, across the ocean in Europe. Michelangelo learned a lot on his own, but he also learned many things about being an artist from his master, Ghirlandaio. One important thing that he may have been taught by his master was the difficult art of fresco painting. Say that with me, fresco painting. To make a fresco, an artist paints on wet plaster, and as the plaster dries, the painting becomes part of the wall, and it lasts a very long time. This is because the flakes of the paint will not flake off at that time. Fresco painting came in very handy for Michelangelo later on when he began his most famous painting, the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. I did get to go in the Sistine Chapel this past summer. It's in the Vatican, and near the Vatican, and it is just beautiful. When we went in there, there were many, many people, probably over 1,000 people in this building at one time, and you had to be very, very quiet and very reverent, because the chapel is a church. You're supposed to be reverent and quiet when you go in. But it was so breathtaking. When you looked up at the ceiling, all you wanted to say was, "Oh my." Michelangelo's first love was sculpture, and when he was about 16, he went to study at a new school that was only for sculptors. It was started by the wealthiest and most powerful man in Florence, Lorenzo de Medici. Lorenzo loved art of all kinds and paid artists to create works of art for him. People who paid artists in this way were known as patrons. Lorenzo soon realized that Michelangelo had a very special talent, and he invited him to live at his palace. The sculpture on the next page was one of the first ones that Michelangelo did at Lorenzo's school. That is an absolute beautiful sculpture. Michelangelo studied as hard as he could to become a good sculptor, but it wasn't until he visited Rome that Michelangelo showed people how good he really was. Rome is in Italy. Rome was just another great art city, and Michelangelo made a statue for a wealthy patron there that amazed everyone who saw it. The Pieta was so beautiful that people found it hard to believe it was done by such a young artist. He was only 24, and this particular statue is in the church there in the Vatican City in Rome, Italy. I got to see it in person this summer, and it was breathtaking. It was so beautiful. That is the Mother Mary holding Jesus. The people who ran the city of Florence heard about Michelangelo's beautiful statue. As soon as he returned home, they asked him to carve a statue for Florence. They even gave Michelangelo a huge block of marble to work with. Michelangelo was very happy. He could not wait to start. Michelangelo turned the block of marble into his most famous sculpture. The statue shows David ready to fight the giant Goliath, but David also shows that the people of Florence thought of themselves as being strong, brave, clever, and ready to defend their city. And this detail of David is 16 feet tall and 10 inches. And this one is located in Florence, and also there is one in New York. The statue of David. It looks very lifelike. During this time, the powerful ruler of the church in Rome heard about Michelangelo. Pope Julius II wanted to build beautiful churches and statues in Rome so that people would remember him. He asked Michelangelo to come there to work. At first, everything was fine. Pope Julius wanted Michelangelo to carve a group of statues for him, but soon after Michelangelo started, Julius lost interest in the project. He decided that there was much more important jobs that he wanted done. So Julius asked Michelangelo to paint the large ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. Michelangelo was very disappointed. He told the Pope he was a sculptor and not a painter. Pope Julius did not care at all what Michelangelo thought and practically forced him to begin painting the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. During the time it took to paint the ceiling, the Pope and Michelangelo had many, many arguments. Now, I'll tell you a little secret. I found out on my visit to Italy that Michelangelo did not get along well with others. He did not have many friends because he had a bad attitude and thought himself to be so great. If you will remember, he was not nice at all to Leonardo da Vinci, who was a much older painter at that time. But as we know, Michelangelo did what he was told, and he started painting the Sistine Chapel. After 4 years, Michelangelo finished the ceiling, and it turned out to be one of the most wonderful paintings in the history of art. The ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. Can you imagine lying on your back, painting from that position, and keeping your arm up like that all day long? I imagine it was very, very tiring. Michelangelo painted many scenes from the Bible, but one of the most famous scenes shows God giving life to Adam. The looks on the faces of God and Adam look very realistic. Michelangelo painted their bodies as they had never been seen in a painting before. Michelangelo became known as one of the greatest painters in the world. I'll tell you a little secret. He painted a lot of his pictures without clothes on, and those are called nudes. And you see them, and sometimes you wonder, ooh, why doesn't he put some clothes on? But that was the time of the Renaissance, and they told him it was okay to paint the pictures just like he wanted them to be painted. I found out something interesting. After he died, 1 year after Michelangelo died, a painter was hired to come in and put loincloths, or like a little bathing suit or something, like a cloth, over some of those bodies, because for a while there they thought it was okay, and then all of a sudden they thought that might not be really nice to have a bunch of naked bodies in the church like that. After the Sistine Chapel was finished, Michelangelo went on to create many other beautiful works of art, including plans for building the famous dome at the top of St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. Ignore that, that's my dog wanting to come in, it's raining out. One of the things that made Michelangelo such a great artist was his ability to give a special energy and strength to the people he painted and sculpted. Even though the statue of Moses is sitting very still, Michelangelo was also able to give him a feeling of great power. This is a statue of Moses. If you will look at his face, he looks very strong and like he's able to lead his people. Moses is a character that was in the Bible that helped to lead his people out of Egypt. They were slaves, and he helped to lead them away into freedom. Michelangelo lived to be nearly 89 years old. He was working on a sculpture called the Rondinini Pieta just a few days before he died. Michelangelo felt the human body was the most important subject that an artist could paint or sculpt. He spent much of his life studying nature and science in order to make his works of art as lifelike as possible. He was really quite a genius of an artist. Recently, Michelangelo's paintings in the Sistine Chapel have been cleaned. When years of grime were removed from them, people were surprised to find that Michelangelo used many more colors in his paintings than could be seen before. The works of art in this book came from the churches and museums all over the world. Some of them came from Florence, Italy. Some came from Milan, Italy. Also Belgium. Italy, France. So most of them are right there in the country of Italy. But I hope you enjoyed doing your little project on Michelangelo, and I hope that you will go home and that you will share some of your main facts that you remember about Michelangelo. You might be able to say that he painted the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, which is near the Vatican in Rome, and the Pope had hired him to come and do sculptures, and he was very excited about sculptures, but after he got there, the Pope changed his mind and told him to paint the ceiling, and that he was not very happy about it, but he did it anyway. He also did many, many famous and beautiful sculptures, one being the picture of Mary holding Jesus, and also the statue of David. So he was a very, very talented sculptor and painter. He lived to be 89 years old, and the little secret I told you was that he didn't get along with people all that well, so you can just remember that little thing about him. So I hope you've enjoyed this story, and I hope you enjoy your project as well. Have a good afternoon.